Welcome to week 29 of our study of the book of Romans. We're officially halfway through the letter. I don't know if that means we're halfway through the study, but we're halfway through the letter. It probably will go a little bit quicker from this point on, but Romans 1 through 8 are just, they're kind of like the meat and potatoes of it. Everything else from here is in light of what we've been talking about. And so that being said, if you're jumping in here for the first time this week, you might get a little confused because it's the summary, it's the summation of everything that we've been talking about. So by all means, hang around, watch this, listen to this, but then you probably need to go back and go through this whole playlist again, just so that you understand the true context of what we're going through. So last week, we kind of halfway discussed what we're discussing this week. We're focusing on the very last verses of Romans chapter 8, verses 31 through 34. Or 36 rather. Last week we kind of focused more on 34. We ended by discussing all the way through 36, but we're going to kind of focus more on 35 through 39 today. So let's go ahead and read this section again to make sure that we have it fresh in our minds. So starting in verse 31, he says, "What then shall we say to all this?" Everything we've been talking about, our vocation, the Spirit, the gift of Jesus, what Jesus did for us, all that. What shall we say to all of this? If God is for us, who is against us? God, after all, did not spare his own Son. He gave him up for us all. How then will he not with him freely give all things to us? Who will bring a charge against God's chosen ones? It is God who declares them in the right. Who's going to condemn? It is the Messiah Jesus who has died, or rather has been raised, who is at God's right hand and who also prays on our behalf. Who shall separate us from the Messiah's love? Suffering or hardship or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword? As the Bible says, because of you we are being killed all day long. We are regarded as sheep destined for slaughter, quoting Psalm 44:22. No, in all these things we are completely victorious through the one who loved us. I am persuaded, you see, that neither death nor life, nor angels nor rulers, nor the present nor the future, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor any other creature will be able to separate us from the love of God and Messiah Jesus, our Lord. So just a reminder from last week, the purpose here is encouragement, right? To encourage the readers that these are people, these Roman Christians, they are suffering. Like there's no doubt about it. Like just even before what's about to happen, which we know from history, it gets much worse. But what they have been going through, they've been suffering because of their faith in Jesus. I mean, Romans 5 through 8, again, is about God's love for us and our answering to that love through that Spirit-inspired love that we have for God, right? That God loves us and we, in turn, through the Spirit, love Him back. I mean, Paul's Exodus analogy, it's not about how well the people behaved when they were enslaved in Egypt. It's not about how well we behave under the slavery of sin. But it's about God's faithfulness to His covenant, that His love for us is what motivated Him to rescue us despite our unfaithfulness, our unworthiness, and all of that culminated in the display of His love for us through Jesus. Romans as a whole is about God's righteousness being revealed. Remember that word righteousness is not about being a right person. It's about being in right standing before the covenant, the law, the rule, the contract that made humanity and God family, that God was righteous towards it. He was in the right by that standard. He was faithful. He was just. And it's about God's justice, His righteousness being revealed, His faithfulness to the covenants, to Noah's, Abraham's, Israel's, David's, and ultimately everybody's through Jesus. Every one of those covenants was broken by the other party. God never broke a single one of them, but He bore the consequences of breaking them. And in turn, He displayed His love for us by taking those on Himself. We could not bear those consequences, but He did. And thus, His love is displayed for us. It is the anchor for which our ships should be attached to. It is the thing that we can rely on above all others. God is for us. That's really what we have to make sure we understand. That's what Paul's been doing all along. And so if we look in this section, remember from last week that Paul, he changed the way he's making his argument in this last little section. It's a response to everything that's come before. And so here he switches to a rhetorical argument. You know, he had 3 sets of rhetorical questions designed to get you to think. There's an obvious answer, but Paul answers it in a way that causes you to ask more questions usually by him asking questions, right? There's 3 rhetorical questions, and then there's 3 biblical references to the 3 sections of the Hebrew Bible. That's your Old Testament. He makes a reference or a quote from the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, from the prophets, and from the writings, which is basically everything that's not part of the law or the prophets. And this is to show that what Jesus did was in accordance with the scriptures, right? It's not just, look how much I know. It's hey, this has been the plan all along. God has been saying this from the beginning. A lot of us just missed it, including himself, right? That's Paul's story. And then he concludes with what we're going to look at today with 2 lists of potential dangers, a list of 7 of potential and real threats, and a list of 10 of potential sources, powers that will cause those threats to happen. And in the rhetorical world, this formal way of arguing in the Greco-Roman style, 7 plus 10 means completeness. So he's saying like everything is wrapped up here, right? He's implying that through this list of 7 and 10. And it's basically like here we see the gospel in miniature. We see God's Son, not spared, crucified, risen, ascended, and now interceding for his people at the Father's right hand, right? That's what this section of verses are. And all of this leads to confidence, right? All of the God's love, it's displayed, it's his righteousness, all of this leads to our confidence. And confidence is kind of a tricky subject, and it's becoming much more relevant today. I mean, I don't know that it ever stopped being relevant, but there seems to be a lack of it amongst a lot of people nowadays. If you think back to the way that people have thought about confidence throughout history, probably the most famous is Rene Descartes' I think, therefore I am, right? He says that you know who you are and what you are because you think, right? That is the evidence that you are what you are. I think, therefore I am. Tom Wright points out that Bishop Leslie Newbegin adapted that to the modern age, and instead of saying I think, therefore I am, he said I shop, therefore I am. That because you are able to be a consumer, because you can buy, you have the confidence in who you are, right? But Tom Wright also summarized this section of Romans by saying Paul is essentially saying I am loved, therefore I am. I am loved by God, therefore I have confidence in who and what I am. And confidence, it's on one hand, it's kind of hard to define. If I could be cliche for a moment, Webster's, the dictionary, defines confidence as a feeling or consciousness of one's powers or of reliance on one's circumstances. Let me say that again. A feeling of consciousness of one's powers or of reliance on one's circumstances. When I was a kid, I got in trouble a lot for picking on my little brothers, for hitting them. I would pester them, I would poke them, I'd smack them, punch them, whatever. Just brothers being brothers. I was 3 and 6 years older than my younger siblings, and they would cry about it, and I would say, I didn't hit you that hard. I wasn't being mean. I didn't hurt you. But they would say, yes, you did. And Mom would get involved, and she would say, it doesn't matter if you thought you hurt them. You didn't hurt them. They experienced pain. And she would always conclude that lecture with perception is reality. Now, there's truth in that, but I would adjust that statement to say perception is reality regardless of the truth, right? Perception is reality regardless of the truth. That the truth really exists, but the way we perceive it, that in a sense is a truth in and of itself, separate from what the reality may be. The truth is the truth, but our perception determines if we understand the truth and or how we understand the truth. Perception is massive. We have to take that into account when we're thinking about things like a feeling or consciousness, as Webster describes confidence, right? That Webster's dictionary says that confidence is a feeling. It's an awareness of one's own self, of one's own ability to be oneself. Confidence is a feeling. And feelings can be dangerous. I mean, the Bible tells us all the way through that a man should not trust his own heart. It is a liar above all. That feelings can be twisted. If social media has taught us anything, it's that we absolutely can be manipulated. Our feelings can be manipulated. People get upset over things they wouldn't otherwise care about. People buy things they wouldn't otherwise buy or even want, but because they spent so much time on social media, They were influenced to do so. That's why people whose job it is to make posts are called influencers. And when we're seeing this is why confidence and anxiety are such hot button issues. It's why the suicide rate is higher than we really ever thought it could be for the general population. That people's emotions are being manipulated, and the result is a lack of confidence, a lack of self-value, a lack of trust. I can prove to you that feelings can be influenced and manipulated beyond your decision. So, if I put this in layman's terms, I would say that feelings are the response to how you think. Feelings are the result of stimuli and how you think of those stimuli, if you want to be fancy. It's what happens, it's what you experience, how you think about that is how you feel. Feelings are the result of how you think. And I can prove it, right? Let's just pretend for a second that you're walking down the street. I'm walking down the street and I see a person in a MAGA hat, and then I see somebody wearing a trans right t-shirt, and then I see a homeless encampment, and then I see someone open carrying a gun, and then I see someone dressed like an anime cartoon character. And I can just keep walking and not say a word, right? I see all that, whatever, right? I used to live in Vegas. I used to see way worse than that. Not say a word, doesn't bother me, move on, don't even think about it again. Versus somebody else walks down that same street and sees all of that, and they wouldn't be able to keep their mouth shut depending on XYZ thing they saw, whether it was the MAGA hat, the trans right thing, the gun, whatever it was. Like something would set them off and they'd have to say something about it. Or maybe they wouldn't say something, but it would bother them just the fact that they experienced that they saw that, and it really hurt them. And so they would have to go share that with somebody. Maybe they make a post, or they start an argument with somebody, or then they get motivated to go and do something about it, to protest one way or the other. Two people experience the same thing. One has strong emotions and one has almost none at all. Now, let me make an obvious aside for a second, but I need to say this. Mental health is a very complicated field. And summing it all up with little statements like I'm making right now does not do it justice, and they can be misunderstood. And to just simply say what I've said and I'm about to say and not make this aside, not make this caveat, it would be a gross mishandling of this, because mental health is a serious issue that the church and our culture as a whole needs to take a lot more seriously. We've made progress, but we need to understand it better. We need to know how to deal with mental health issues better. My goal is to show the principle and application of the proper use of our minds, of our thinking, our proper understanding of what our emotions are, and not dismiss genuine mental health issues. Loving Jesus more is not the one-shot cure to everybody's mental health problems and disorders. If somebody teaches that, it's spiritual abuse. Through and through. It is just as bad, if not worse, than any prosperity gospel preacher out there. That if you love Jesus more, you're going to be healthy, wealthy, and blah, blah, blah. Loving Jesus more will not cure your depression if you have serious depression. It will not cure your mental illness. It will not cure your disorder just because you love Jesus more. Loving Jesus is the foundation of all cures for mental problems. And some mental problems just will never go away. But loving Jesus is where the path of healing starts. It's maybe where it concludes. You never know. But the point is, I'm not saying love Jesus more, think about Jesus more, only focus on Jesus, and all of a sudden those things go away. That's not at all what I'm saying. That is spiritual abuse to teach that. I'm saying that if you genuinely need help, Jesus is where you start, but if you need help, go to a Christian professional who has been trained and schooled in how to help people who have mental problems. Right? I just want to make that crystal clear. Mental health problems, I've dealt with them a lot, whether in my life as a firefighter, as a pastor, or even in my own personal life, that mental health issues are not something to be taken lightly, and just loving Jesus is not the cure to them all. Okay? So that being said, the foundational principle that both science and the Bible recognize is as you think, so you feel, right? As you think, so you feel. Proverbs 4:23 in the NLT says, guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life, right? Heart being your feeling center, your thinking center, right? If you see Old Testament, anytime they mention the heart, The Old Testament writers, they thought in terms of that was where you thought, right? And it wasn't the feeling center the way we would describe the heart. They were saying that as you think, so goes your life. Or Proverbs 23:7. They are always thinking about how much it costs. Eat and drink, they say, but they don't mean it. Meaning that as you think, you will go. And if somebody is influencing you to go some way, but they don't believe it themselves, well, that application is false. That you have to judge for yourself. You have to weigh out your thoughts. Don't just let other people tell you what to do. Don't let other people tell you what to think, because they may be just manipulating you. We have to think for ourselves. We have to evaluate our thinking to understand how we're feeling. And Paul echoed this in Romans 2 and Romans 8, where he talks about how you think determines how you feel. That those who think godly think in terms of the Spirit, they will live by the Spirit. But those who think in terms of the flesh, of this world, of the brokenness around us, well, they will live lives that look like that. And the result is separation from God. If you think godly, you will draw close to God. But if you think worldly, you will draw far away from God. If your thinking is darkened in opposition with God, you're going to feel things that are in opposition to God, and it will result in you living in opposition to God. Eventually, Paul will come back to this same line of thinking from Romans 2 and Romans 8 and Romans 12 to the transformers verse, right? Be transformed by the renewing of your mind so that you may determine what the will of God is. It's saying the same thing again. How we think matters because it affects how we feel, and how we feel affects how we live. And that gets us back to the idea of confidence. That everything that Paul has been writing up to this point in Romans concludes here with our confidence. The feeling of trust in one situation. That everything will work out, that everything will be okay. I mean, that's what Romans 8:37 means. It says, no, in all these things we are completely victorious, more than conquerors through the one who loves us. That word there, where it's usually translated more than conquerors, completely victorious, it's hyper victory, right? Hyper Nike, basically. That's what the word Nike means. It means victory. Like we are super victorious. That's what it means. That's what our confidence is. And so Paul's goal from chapter 5 on, and really again from all the letters, is going to get his readers to understand God is for us. That his love is explicitly displayed through Jesus for us. And our thinking has to be centered around this in order for us to not only know that God is for us, but believe it. But not only believe it, but accept it. And not only accept it, but trust it. And not only trust it, but feel it. But experience it. Because perception is reality regardless of the truth, and Paul knows that. He knows that if we don't know, if we don't believe, if we don't accept, if we don't trust, if we don't experience, if we don't feel the love of God, when the world attacks, when everything comes crashing down, because it will, we'll be prone to default to what we do know, believe, accept, trust, and feel. Right? As a firefighter, I've gone through a lot of trainings, and I've done some pistol training and stuff like that. I've done some of those kind of things as well. And if you talk to people who do military training, like combat training and police training and EMS training, when they train you for the situations where everything just kind of hits the fan, where everything is falling apart, where you don't have any time to think, you just have to react. The building is collapsing around you. The bullets are flying. The patient is coding. You don't have time to stop and think. You have to react. You will default to your training. Through and through. And I've experienced it myself more than once, that when you are in that condition where you don't have time to think, you just have to react, you will default to what you've trained. You will default to what you feel. You won't default to the textbook. You won't stop and think through the rules or through the list of things you're supposed to. You will default to how you have trained. Same is true for Christians. That's what Paul is getting at here, is that when the world attacks you, when the adrenaline is pumping and you have to make a decision, you will default to what you truly believe, to what you truly know, to what you truly feel, to what you truly accept, to what you truly understand. Your feelings, they will drive those decisions in those moments. Paul knows that when his readers are pushed to extremes, they will either default to their confidence in God's love or they will fall away. Because Paul knows from experience, living as a Christian absolutely 100% will bring about those moments. Not because the Christian failed, sinned, worshipped idols, or did something wrong, but because of Jesus and for his sake. Right? Jesus said that we will be attacked because the world hates him, and because we are his little Christ, that we are co-heirs with him, that we should expect to experience the same kind of treatment. But he will use that. He will use that suffering. He will use that pain. He will use that loss. He will use those hardships to accomplish his purposes. That's what we've been talking about all the way through the midsection of Romans. That we will suffer, but we will count it all as nothing compared to what we inherit, right? That's what Paul said. That all that we go through, it's nothing compared to what we inherit, but we will go through it, and God will work through it. That's what Romans 8:28 is about. As our job, as going about being part of the rescue plan, the suffering that happens to us, it's not a sign of bad times or our disobedience or God's divine disfavor with us. No, it's a sign that God is working through us. Not that he sends those, but he uses those moments when the world attacks us. And that's why Paul quoted Psalm 44:22 in verse 36. That psalm is explicitly written from the perspective of somebody who is suffering, not because they did anything wrong, not because they did bad things, not because God is mad at them, but because God is going to use that suffering, that hardship, to accomplish his purposes in the end. That's why Psalm 44:22 kind of culminates in the line that Paul quotes. Yet for your sake, for the sake of God, for the sake of Jesus, for your sake, we are being killed all the day long. We are regarded as sheep to be slaughtered. Paul is saying here in no uncertain terms, expect to go through hardship. Expect to be a sheep being led to slaughter. The world hates Jesus and in turn hates us, his little Christs, Christians. Paul is going to show that bad things happening are not a sign of God's anger, but rather they are part of God's rescuing work together in us and through us. They're part of our vocation to be embraced rather than shamefully ignored, hidden, not talked about, used, and definitely not used as evidence that you don't love God enough. This is why the prosperity gospel stands on no legs. Anybody who preaches that and anybody who believes that is either a liar, manipulator, or being manipulated. Because this is what God promises us. But he says the reward in the end will be worth so much so that you won't even care in the end. Not that what you go through now doesn't hurt, doesn't have pain, doesn't have consequences, doesn't affect you. Like, no, he's saying that's real. But in the end, God is going to rescue creation through us. Our reward will be worth so much more than the suffering that we go through. And it all gets back to knowing, believing, accepting, trusting, and feeling the love of God in Jesus. Because death and suffering don't have the last words. God does. And so if we look back at our section, verses 35 through 39, he opens it by saying, who shall separate us from the Messiah's love? Suffering or hardship or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword, as the Bible says in the quote, because of you we are being killed all day long. We are regarded as sheep destined for slaughter. No, in all of these things we are completely victorious, more than conquerors. Hypernikomen is the word. Through the one who loved us. I am persuaded, you see, that neither death nor life, nor angels nor rulers, nor the present nor the future, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor any other creature will be able to separate us from the love of God in Messiah our Jesus. If we step back and we look at these sections together, we can see essentially a sandwich of God's love. And in between, we see the hardships. In the middle, we still see God's love. But God's love bookends and fills the space in between of what we experience in this life when it comes to suffering. Because God's love is the anchor on which we are supposed to be attached. It is our strong harbor when the storm rages. Verse 35 opens with the love of God, followed by a list of 7 attacks that might happen to you, right? He says suffering, physical pain, right? Hardship. And this is the social, this is the cultural attacks, the loss of jobs, the loss of relationships, the end of friendships, those kind of things because of Christ. He says expect persecution. People will attack Jesus, they kill Jesus, expect them to attack you because you have faith in Jesus. Famine. I mean, this was a regular occurrence in Paul's day. It was caused by war or crop failure or greed or politics. Expect to experience famine, the loss of even basic necessities because of what Christ is doing. He says nakedness, poverty, having enough to clothe yourself and put a roof over your head. And lastly, he says the sword. And this is one that the English translation kind of misses the nuances of. The word here is makaira, which is a short sword specifically used for executions normally. There was another word he could have used called xiphos, which was the war sword. So this isn't saying that you can expect to die in battle. He's saying, no, you can expect to die deliberate deaths by an executioner, that the governments of the world will fail to do their job to ensure peace and justice, and they may turn their power against you. And he follows by Psalm 22 saying that even if all of that happens, God's working through it. And then it's followed by the great hope of the super victory that we have. That hyper-nikomen, hyper-Nike, right? And that's through the love of Jesus. That's what he says. Verse 35 says, who shall separate us from the Messiah's love? Verse 37, and all these things we are completely victorious through the one who loved us, Christ's love. And then it's followed by a list of 10 possible sources of the attacks from the earlier verse. He starts off, and these are mostly in pairs. He says, death and life. These are two possible states of existence and the powers behind them. They can't separate us from the love of God. Angels and rulers, the actual powers of heaven and earth. They can't separate us from the love of God. The present and the future, the time zones we can experience. God's already dealt with the past at the cross, but the present is dangerous and the future is uncertain, except for our ultimate destiny. None of those can separate us from the love of Christ. The powers, which is kind of the catch-all for anything that's not the angels and rulers, that nothing else out there that could possibly be out there can separate us from the love of God. He says neither the height nor depth, implying all of creation, all of the cosmos, all of the universe. Nothing, no distance can separate us from the love of Christ. No height, no matter how powerful anything gets, can separate us from the love of Christ. No matter how low we fall, nothing can separate us from the love of Christ. And he finishes it with what seems just like a catch-all for anything, where he says any other creature. But there's more than just, this is just a catch-all for everything else. It is that. But he's saying that all these sources of attacks, they're all creatures. They're all part of the creation. But our rescue, the gospel, is about the love of the Creator himself. Nothing can separate us from the love of God. And it concludes with verse 39 with saying that nothing separates us from the love of God. If God raised Jesus from the dead, everything else is all gravy. We just have to trust. We have to know it. We have to believe it. We have to accept it. We have to trust it. We have to experience it. Because that needs to be the default mode for our lives. And that's not something that's just, I'm done. It's something we have to do every single day, that we have to continually go back to the love of God, that when we face suffering, when we face trials, when we face hardships, when we face difficulties, when we face stress at home, stress at work, stress with friends, stress with family, when we experience persecution and loss, when we experience all the brokenness and evil that this world has at us, when we experience creation and its brokenness, when we experience the hatred of the world because of our love for Jesus, we have to go back to the love of God. Hopefully this has helped you understand Romans a little bit clearer. If you have any questions, reach out. Otherwise, we'll see you next time.